Okay, kids, it's time for another episode of the Fueled by Weird podcast, the only podcast now fully FDA approved. I'm Chris Daly, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with writer Rich Douek. Rich, how's it going today, man?
I'm good, man. How are you?
I'm doing good. All right, so to kick things off, we usually do an icebreaker question just to kind of get to know each other a little bit better. So today's icebreaker question, if you had an unlimited supply of one thing, what would it be?
Mm,
It's a tough one.
it's a tough one, yeah. And I guess like money is the easy answer because then you can have unlimited supply of pretty much anything, but that's kind of
That's
boring.
that's true.
Um, hmm, Unlimited supply of anything. It's tough. I would say I would like an unlimited supply of Diet Coke because I drink a
Ooh,
lot of it and
nice. That's a good one.
and
Actually,
it adds up.
nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
mine's kind of in the same vein. I would pick orange soda. I
nice.
like orange. I don't. I mostly reach for like Mountain Dew or something like that. But if I had an unlimited supply, I would definitely pick orange soda. So I'm kind of in the same wheelhouse. So I'm with you.
Yeah, it'd be
Orange,
nice. Just like walk into a store and like any store and just fill up like a, big gulp or something.
right?
Right.
Or even like in that Adam Sandler movie, Mr. Deeds, where they have the fruit punch water fountain, or you just have it all the time.
There you
Like,
go.
okay,
Yeah.
I would take that because fruit punch
Mhm.
would be a second one because that
Yeah.
would be awesome just to have it in your house all the time.
Hell yeah.
That would be rad. All right. Well, with the Fueled by Weird podcast, we usually like to talk a little bit about, what Fueled by Weird is. And it's kind of the stuff that makes you who you are, makes you, the weirdo that you are for quote
hmm
unquote. So what are some of the things that feel you're weird? What are some of the things that you're interested in?
well, comic books, obviously. But
Sure.
I'm also into just like reading science fiction, fantasy, horror. I'm really into like Warhammer gaming.
Oh, nice.
I actually don't really play the game that much anymore, but I love painting miniatures. So like I have
Okay.
like shelves and shelves of them. Um, I do video games too. Um, what else? Yeah, I like I guess you could call it like trivia. Like I don't know, like I like to just sort of like it's not so much that like I do like trivia quizzes or anything, but like I
Mhm.
like really kind of like deep dive into topics. So it's like I'll like get
Yeah.
lost on like Wikipedia for like,
Oh,
you know,
dude. Yeah.
hours, like, reading about like the cuisine of like Kazakhstan or like something like that, like just
Nice.
some random thing will get stuck in my head and I'll be like, I want to read about that. And like I'll just like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm familiar. I can relate to that because I'll jump into like a show for the first time and I'll be like, well, what was the inspiration behind the show? Or what was the idea? So I'll get onto Wikipedia and most times I end up spoiling it for myself. But
Yeah.
I like to look into, how things get started or just, like you said, just randomly, just not necessarily into trivia contests, but you just useless trivia that you're never gonna need, but all of a sudden you just have that that
Yeah.
itch
It's like,
to
it's just
go and
like in
look it
my
up.
head. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I can definitely relate with that. Um, so writing, you've written a lot of books, you've written comics. What is it that inspired you to get into writing in the first place?
Well, I think, I mean, like reading is like a big part of it. And just like, you know, growing up, I guess, like, and like reading a book and feeling so engrossed in like the worlds of the book,
Yeah.
because I read a lot of like, kind of like epic fantasy and science fiction. I'm talking like stuff like Lord of the Rings and Dune and stuff like that. And I guess at like a certain point, I was just like, wow, I'd love to be able to come up with something like that on my own, I wonder if I could do that. And the answer for many years was no. It was like I could come up with like, maybe like 2, 3 chapters of it or something like that, and then I would lose
Yeah.
steam. But eventually, I just found like I really enjoyed a lot of aspects of it, of like world building and going through like plot. And then I think once I started kind of um setting my sights a little more realistically, to the point where I wasn't like, oh, like, I'm gonna write an amazing trilogy novel, or like whatever, and it was just like, okay, let's try like a short story, you know.
Yeah,
And then also getting into comics, and like, let me try writing comic script as opposed to like writing like prose and stuff like that. And just like the more I finished, the more confident I got, and the more uh it's like, I guess, like, you kind of like learn to use like certain tools when you're writing, and yeah, and from there I just kept going, and it got to the point where, like, if I have an idea and it's interesting to me, I know how to like develop it now into like a finished work.
that's awesome. And yeah, I know, being a writer myself, I have trouble with that because, like you said, you'll come up with this really big, grandiose idea and you know where
Mhm.
you want to end, but in order to get where you want to end, you have to start somewhere. And then it can
Yeah,
kind of get frustrating because, you've got this big long path to get to the end, but it's like I don't want to take the path to get there because I just want to get to the cool part. I don't want to do all the
yeah.
work to get there. Just let me tell you about the cool part. So yeah, that makes perfect sense. And when it comes to writing, doing the short story part, that's kind of what I usually tend to do is the short story stuff. And that helps to kind of get the ideas out a little bit quicker. And I've kind of gotten to that point where I'm starting to try to, maybe go out into a bigger aspect or to a different aspect because I do a lot of prose writing. And so trying to, tackle a comic book script or tackle another thing definitely is something that, yeah, I can, yeah, that's cool.
Hmm.
Um, so when you're coming up with your ideas, because I was doing my homework and I saw that you've written all sorts of stuff. Um, where do you come up with the ideas that you do? Because I mean, I've seen you've written Magic the Gathering, which is something I'm a big fan of. Um, not as much since I've been older. It's something I need to get back into, but when I was younger, I was big into Magic the Gathering. I've seen you've written Superman books for DC. You've written Harley Quinn books for DC. You've written for Marvel. Um, I saw even you wrote some Turtles for IDW.
Hmm.
When you come up and you've got your original ideas, of course, when you are coming up with these ideas, like, is there something specific that you do? Like, do you have like a writing ritual that you go through to come up with your ideas? Do they just kind of just come at you from out of nowhere?
Well, I mean, some of them do. Some of them just sort of like come from, like I was saying, like I might be like just researching something that piqued my interest, and it'll spark an idea. Like, sometimes ideas will, change from what I originally thought they were. Like just for like one example, I wrote a book called Road of Bones. That was a horror story set in the Russian Gulag in the 1950s. That's like where they kind of exiled political prisoners to Siberia, and just like people were like living there under horrible conditions. And the Road of Bones is like a real place where it was like they were building this highway across Siberia, and they call it the Road of Bones because they were digging up the highway, but people were like dying because their work was so brutal and conditions were so bad. The ground was frozen, and instead of you know wasting labor to dig graves, they just kind of buried them in the pit that they were building the road in and paved it over, which is
Wow.
pretty fucked up.
Yeah.
Um, but why do I know this, and why? The reason was because I like I'd watched some like movie or show that had to do with like a prison break. I don't think it was the show Prison Break, but it was just something where, like, some people were breaking out of prison, and I was just like, oh,
Yeah.
that's a really cool setting for a story. Like, I would love to write some kind of prison break story. And in my head, like, I usually, like, at the time, especially, I was more into writing like science fiction or fantasy. So I was like, oh, like, maybe I'll come up with like some kind of fantasy kingdom or planet, or whatever, and
Yeah.
like, and we'll have like this prison break, but let me read up about some famous prison breaks, just to kind of see if I get any ideas. And so I started reading about all this like gulag stuff, and just how brutal and crazy it was. And I was just like, the more I thought about it, I was like, I've never heard this like story before, and I've never seen a story set in this specific time in history before. And I was like, maybe I don't need to create some fantasy world for it. Maybe I could just tell a story in that real world setting, and then that's what eventually became Road Bones. Um, so that was just something that like I couldn't really have like planned out. It just sort of happened, you know.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different when I'm doing something with an existing character like Superman or even like or Magic the Gathering, because you know that's like I know where that's going to be set, and what that comes down to is like I find just really kind of getting to the core and the truth of the characters and what I want to say about them. Like, you know, because like Superman is a good example because, you know, there's like thousands of Superman stories and a lot
Yeah.
of them, you know, are like amazing. And it's the sort of thing where when you first look at it, you're like, what could I say with about what could I do with Superman that hasn't been done? It's like, should I have him fight Lex Luthor? Oh, that's been done. Should I have him fight Darkseid? That's been done. Should I have him lose his powers? That's been done. Should I have him, you know, should I make a villain that like uses kryptonite? Oh, that's been, it's like everything's been done. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it becomes less about coming up with like some kind of cool challenge for him, like, and more about like what do I love about Superman and what do I want to say about him? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like for me, it was like what I love about Superman is that he will always do the right thing even when it's inconvenient, even when it's arguably dumb to do the right thing. You know what I mean? Like in the story I wrote, like basically it's funny. There's like a YouTuber who's like filming something on like a stunt on top of the Daily Planet, and he falls off the Daily Planet building. So Superman saves him, but the guy's filming the whole time, and he posts it on his channel, and then it becomes like a trend. People where like all these like social media people are like kind of jumping off of buildings because they know Superman's going to come and save them. So they get the video, and it's like, you know, hashtag saved by Superman. So the whole story, it's like he's like kind of dealing with these threats to Metropolis. Like he's got to fight Lex Luthor, and then he hears somebody jump off a building, you know, shouting that, and he's got to go run off and save them. And it's like it's kind of like running him ragged, but it's like he's still going to go and save all those people, you know. And finally, not spoil anything, but like he has like a he finally like realizes he has to kind of confront the original guy and talk to him about like why he should not be doing this.
Yeah.
Um, so, but that's like really what I love about Superman is just that he's like he's there's just like no question like he's going to find a way to like save you no matter what. So it's like once you kind of lock onto that, that gives you it's almost like immaterial what the kind of like plot challenges are. Like, you know, it doesn't matter if he's like if he's fighting Brainiac or if he's fighting Lex Luthor or if he's fighting whoever. It's like you just hold on to that core of like what you want to say about the character. So, you know, like I said, it's like slightly different, but that's kind of my process for when I work with like superheroes or any licensed characters. Like,
That's interesting because it's almost, that story kind of is like, when those kids are doing all those stupid TikTok challenges and stuff like that. That's kind of
mhm,
that's an interesting take on it. Because it's kind of like implementing that in the superhero world. Like, how would a superhero handle one of these
right.
crazy, weird things like that? That's kind of a cool take on it.
Thanks.
Now, when it comes to the already established IPs, um, do you come to with the story that you want to tell to the editor, and they kind of tell you like, hey, this is, I like your story, but you need to change this. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, how much of the story do you get to tell with the already established IP based on, what am I trying to say? How much of the story that you want to tell is changed by the publisher, and how much of it is,
Right.
the story that you want to tell?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's different every time, really. Some stories have like objectives and some don't. Like, I wrote a thing for Marvel Digital that was called "Who is Kang?" And the goal of that story was to kind of compress, 50, 60 years or however long Kang has been around, compress that history into a short comic that someone could read and basically come away knowing who Kang is and how he fits into the universe. And like, I think it came out around the time Quantumania did, because I think the thinking was that, like, if let's say you went and saw the Ant-Man movie and there's this guy Kang and you're like, oh, that's interesting, let me pick up a Kang comic, and like not knowing like exactly like who he is in the comics, it's like this is just
Yeah.
sort of a little primer. So that was like a comic that had like a an objective. So that was like a little more limiting in terms of like what I could do. But again, what I had to do was just sort of really get to the core of like what do I want to say about Kang? Like what do I want to come through? For something like Magic the Gathering, I came on at issue 21. There were 20 issues beforehand, and Jed McKay, very talented writer, he's writing Avengers right now for Marvel and Moon Knight, a bunch of other stuff. But he had written the first 20 issues, and he had this arc that he was building. But that arc kind of wrapped up around issue 20, and so I had like a little more leeway. So I just came with kind of like the, you know, not loose, but like, like just like a general idea of like the story that I wanted to tell. And showed it to Jed, showed it to the editors. They had to show it to the Magic the Gathering people, and like we all had to kind of get on board. But like once you're on board with like once everyone's on board with the basic concept, like certain details are going to change along the way.
Yeah.
So um, especially with Magic, um, there's a lot of like continuity, and like there are also things that are just sort of like in play that would have no control over, or no way of knowing. So it's like um, I don't know how familiar you are with Magic, but there's this race called the Phyrexians who are like kind of like these. I guess they're like the Magic version of the Borg, but they're like kind of like a big bad in Magic multiverse. And all the sets that are kind of that have been coming out the past couple of years have been about this like war with the Phyrexians. And so as far as the comic go, they were like, we don't want you to do anything with the Phyrexians because we don't want people to get confused when it's not exactly the same as like the storyline in the cards. So
Okay.
it's like, so okay, so they're off the board. So I have to like find some other way to go. But it's not like I was like, oh God, I've been dying to tell a story about the Phyrexians and like, like fuck it
Yeah.
up. So,
Right.
um, yeah, things change during the process. But I think, you know, in general, when I like would present an idea or present like a story, like it usually like the broad strokes of it do get through, you know. There's other comics that like for like the Star Lord comic I did, uh all I knew going in was that they wanted like uh it was like basically like old man Star Lord. It was like the Wasteland story.
Yeah.
So, but there weren't any kind of like specific things I could or couldn't do. So I wrote like, I think 3 or 4 ideas that I had that I thought would be cool ideas. And I was like, here they are. Like, like let me know which one you guys are like vibing with the most, because I liked all of them. So they picked one, and then, and then just further developed it into the story. So, it's like, it's like there's always going to be things that like the publisher can veto, or the publisher can say like you can't do that, or we don't want to do that. But for the most part, it's like a team effort. So it's like, um I'd be like, here's a story I want to tell. They're like, we like this, let's figure out how to tell it within the parameters of like what we can do and what we can't do, you know.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So for the most part, the stories you want to tell, they're letting you tell what you want to tell, and if they make any changes, they don't change it enough that it changes your story,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. Or like if they do, then I mean, like that's the job, is like
Right.
finding a way to have it still be a story I want to tell, uh, but taking into account those changes. You know what I mean?
Like a happy medium.
Yeah, it's like, you know, it's yeah, like I could get a note saying, well, you need to change this because I don't know, like this is not something that happened, but like let's just say I wrote a story with like Lex Luthor in it, and they were like, well, you need to change this because in issue 203 of Action Comics, Lex Luthor said said such and such, and you can't contradict that. So it's like, okay, so let me figure out
Gotcha.
a different way to do it, but a different way that kind of has the same says the same thing or has the same impact that my goal was with the original
Gotcha.
scene.
That makes sense. And the other thing I was going to ask, which you've kind of already touched on a little bit, was when you come with these stories, do the publishers say like, "Hey, I want you to tell this specific type of story with this character," or do you say like, "Hey, I'd like to write a story using this character. Here's some ideas. What do you think?" Or does it kind of work both ways?
I think it kind of works both ways, and one thing I want to keep it like you to keep in mind is that I'm not like super far along in like doing licensed work with like
For sure.
Marvel or DC, so I don't
Yeah.
have like a ton of experience with it.
Right.
Uh, but from what I know, like from my own experiences and from the experiences of friends who are a little who have done like a more consistent work, it's like I think it's pretty much different every time. Like
Okay.
because there's some assignments that have a lot of you know, I wouldn't call them constraints, but like sort of like goals or prerequisites, and then there are others that are totally open. So like
Gotcha.
if it was something like we want you to think up a new Captain America series, or we want you to, like we're relaunching Captain America with like a new issue one. What do you want to do? It's like, then yeah, it's like pretty much totally open, where I could be like, well, here's my vision and here's what I want to do, and blah 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 blah. If it's something like, oh, we want you to write a tie-in to Fall of X, or whatever the next X-Men event is,
Yeah.
it's like, then obviously whatever I write is going to have to hew pretty closely to what's going on in that event, you know?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So it really kind of just varies, and it
Yeah. It varies.
kind of
And
both happen.
yeah, both can
Okay.
happen. And I think the more like, I think in general, like it's not true for everyone, but
Sure. Yeah.
the usual path is it's like you start out getting assignment work where it's like, hey, we need a tie-in for this, or hey, we need a short story for this, or we need a backup for that. And it's a little more that kind of constrained work. But once you kind of prove that you could do that and do that well, assignments where you get a little more uh, ability to kind of flex your muscles, or like kind of like bring a little bit more of your own ideas to the table, come along like later on.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know I'm sure it's different for everyone. I'm just concerned. I'm not concerned.
Yeah.
I'm just curious about how it worked with your
Yeah.
particular experience.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
Um, so the big one we're here for, Breath of Shadows, your newest series. It's an incredible series.
Oh, thank you.
Damien, thank you for letting me read it. It was great. It was very extremely detailed. And so I want to ask, like, well, first I want to say for anyone who hasn't read it, do you want to kind of give a little bit of a breakdown of what Breath of Shadows is about?
Sure. Sure. So Breath of Shadows is a story set in the 1960s. It follows this rock star named Jimmy Meadows, who's kind of like, like a Jim Morrison, Mick Jagger type. He's like the lead singer in a really popular rock band called The Shades. Uh, but he's also hopelessly addicted to heroin and other drugs and the rock star lifestyle. And he's got like a serious case of like writer's block. Uh, can't come up with songs for the new album. The band is really pissed off at him, and they basically give him an ultimatum. They're like, get clean or you're out. And he doesn't really know what to do. Uh, but his manager kind of turns him on to this book by a novelist who uh, everyone thinks disappeared, but basically it's a guide to like the book is like a chronicle of a journey this guy took, who was also addicted to heroin, went down to the jungles in the Yucatan and found basically this like miraculous drug that uh, like spiritually like kind of saved him. So if you like today, it's like something like what we would call it like ayahuasca or something like that, something that'll
Yeah.
kind of like give you, but back in the 60s, it wasn't really like well known. So um, it's this drug that's basically just supposed to kind of like bring you to another level of consciousness and cure you of all that ails you. But so he organizes a trip to go down there, hooks up with this crew of researchers who are heading into the jungle anyway to investigate some newly found ruins, and all of them basically run afoul of kind of like a centipede worshipping cult down there. So somebody called it a friend of mine who read it said like it's like the Doors meets Cannibal Holocaust, which I thought was
Okay, yeah, I could see that.
which I thought was pretty funny. Like there's no cannibalism in it, like technically,
Yeah.
but yeah, I thought that was like a pretty apt description.
Yeah, okay. I could see that.
Yeah.
So when you were writing this book, kind of like with your Road of Bone story, did you do like a lot of research into this to kind of, because it seemed like it's almost like you were there. That's how accurate
Yeah.
it was.
Yeah, I did a lot of research both into like kind of psychedelic movement and music, but also into like Mayan culture and just the because I really wanted to be respectful both to the ancient Mayan culture, but also the culture in Mexico, during the 60s. Um, and it's funny because I knew I wanted to use centipedes, uh, and I knew I wanted it to be set in like Mayan ruins in the Yucatan. Uh, and I started researching like what like about like kind of like the rediscovery of a lot of these ruins, and what I found was there was a major ruin discovered in the 1960s in Guatemala, which is very close to the border of Mexico,
Yeah.
and it's called El Peruaca, which means the centipede water. So it was just sort of one of those things where it was like just I don't know, like is it something that I read and forgot? But I really don't think so. Like it was just like a weird coincidence that you know that all lined up. But yeah, I did a lot of research, and another really funny thing was like it's El Peru Waka, which I guess translates into something different in Mayan, but like I got like dinged in like a review. Somebody was like, I don't know why this guy is saying it's Mayans when he's talking about they're going to Peru, because Peru is a completely different culture. It's the Incans, it's just some white guy who didn't do his research or anything. And I'm like, no, like here's the article from like, you know, the actual researchers that are, that are down there right now, like digging out archaeological stuff. I'm like, it's not Peru, it's called El Peru. It's like that's
Yeah.
just like a quirk.
Those
But
damn internet trolls, man.
yeah, I know. Well, I mean, like the guy, like he's not a troll. I mean, it's a misunderstanding, but it's just
That's fair.
like I just I really did do like a lot of reading like beforehand. Did that with
Yeah.
Lord of the Bones, CSR was like all my like historical horror books. Like it just you know, it's important to me to like, even though I know I'm telling like a fantasy, like a fictional story, so I know I'm going to change some details. It's like I at
Sure.
least want to know what I'm changing and why, you know?
Kind of have the background on
Yeah,
what you're doing, so
exactly.
you kind of know where to know what happens, so you can kind of springboard off onto your own thing, but still kind of be respectful to the source material.
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
makes sense. Um, and so it dealt a lot with addiction, did you, do any
Yeah.
kind of research into addiction as well?
Yeah. I mean, I read a lot of not just for this, but like one of my favorite authors is William S. Burroughs, who wrote a lot about addiction. He was like addicted to heroin himself. He's actually the inspiration for the Bill Tarrant character in the book, who's like the author of the book that kind of like lures him down there. I did that. I've like have like friends and people like acquaintances and things that have like struggled with addiction in their lives. Like, I've never struggled with like heroin addiction specifically, but I definitely have like things in my life that I wish I could like do less of, you know.
Yeah, don't we
So
all?
yeah. So yeah, and I just really tried to get into that like psychological like space of it.
Nice. And
Yeah.
yeah, centipedes was a good choice because yeah, the whole time, just every time they popped up, it made my skin crawl. So if that's what you're going for, you freaking nailed it,
Yeah.
dude.
Yeah, well, it's funny because it like the reason I wanted to use them was actually because of like a William S. Burroughs quote, because he had like a phobia of centipedes.
Yeah,
He just said something like the gist of the quote is like any man who's like sympathetic to centipedes, who's like, come here, my cute little centipede, is like a traitor to the human race and should be killed immediately.
dude, totally. I mean, I right after I read the sixth issue, I came down to my basement and I saw a pretty good sized one crawling on my floor, and
Yeah.
yeah, it creeped me out. It was almost like it just knew,
They
like,
just look
oh my,
so alien, like
yeah,
so like different from like any other like creature. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's like super creepy.
yeah.
But
Yeah, I agree. And so I can't remember. Is it coming out soon? Is it all available now?
yeah, it's all available now as far as single issues go, and the trade is going to be coming out like in collected version. I believe it's going to be coming around like around September, October, so like kind of just in time for Halloween. But
Perfect.
if you're out there, you can pick up the single issues or pick it up digitally, or if you're going to wait for the trade, just put it on your list.
Put it on your wish list. It's coming.
Yeah.
Right on. So, after Breath of Shadows, what's coming up next? Do you have anything that you can talk to us about now that is okay to talk about?
Uh, there's one or two things. So like I have
Okay.
out in August, I have another Magic the Gathering story coming out with Boom.
Nice.
It's called Planeswalkers Notorious. The idea is to showcase some of like the more sinister planeswalkers in the Magic universe. So I'm in a double issue. So I have a story in there, and I think Cullen Bunn wrote the other one. So that's gonna be a lot
All
of
right
fun.
on. That's cool. We're actually going to be talking to him, I think, this weekend, actually.
Oh, nice.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
he's a great guy.
Right on.
He's like great writer too. So it's very cool to like be sharing billing with him.
Yeah, for sure.
Um, and then there's another one that I'm gonna have to be a little bit coy about, but
Okay. That's
uh,
fair.
I am going to be announcing it next week, right before San Diego Comic-Con. It's a new it's a horror book, but it's more like freewheeling and like a little bit a lot more kind of like funny. So it's almost like I guess like Return of the Living Dead style horror than
Okay.
like really dark and creepy. But I've had a lot of fun writing it.
Nice.
That's a 4 issue series. It's going to get announced next week. I will. What can I say? Say if you like cars, you like hot rods and stuff like that, you're gonna love it. If you're
Nice.
like kind of like Rob Zombie, Smokey and the Bandit, like that kind of stuff. I think I think you really dig it. So
Right on.
just keep an eye out on my like Twitter page and social media stuff, and I'll be like shouting about it. I think it's going to be announced on Wednesday.
Right on.
Yeah.
Well, so for final thoughts, do you have any advice you'd give to other creatives out there who are, just starting out on their creative journey? What would you tell them? What's some advice you'd give?
Um, would you rather have comic specific advice or just creating writing in general?
What either way,
Okay.
both one or the other doesn't matter.
Okay. So I would say probably the most valuable thing that helped me, uh that was like kind of like a mental hill I had to get over, was I had to do away with the idea that I was going to write something or create something that was like perfect and exactly what I dreamed, like right out of the gate. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Because what would happen to me a lot is I would start something and it wouldn't be turning out the way that I envisioned it, and I would get really frustrated and just be like, "Well, screw it. It's not worth doing it if it's not going to be, not going to be great, and this isn't
yeah,
what I wanted to do. This isn't living up to my expectations." So that's like a real uh it's a real big hill to climb when you're just starting out. So
sure.
what what worked for me was, I forget where I read it, but it was just somebody was just basically talking about how like just be comfortable with sucking for a little while. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like just sort of like let go of that idea that like it has to be perfect. And like one way to do that is to like if you have this idea that you want to be like the fucking perfect idea, it's like okay, it's like just put it on the shelf for a minute and then like do some like practice stuff, like almost think of it as like warm-ups, you know what I mean? Like
yeah,
write stuff that you don't, that's not as like near and dear to your heart, just as like an exercise, just as if you were someone gave you like some kind of school assignment that you had to do, and and maybe it's not the thing that you're most inspired or jazzed about to write, but like it's just something that will kind of like help you work out your skills and help you kind of understand what you're doing and understand where you need to improve, because we all need to improve. Like there's things that like I need to improve, like in my writing, even having done it like for so long. So it's like it's like just like letting go of like the idea of like perfectionism, I think is like one of the biggest things you can do, because you got to realize like two things. Like it takes time to develop skills, it takes experience, but it also, you can edit. You know what I mean? Like if you're a writer, you could write a draft that's like total garbage, but you finish it, you put it in a drawer, you come back to it with fresh eyes, or you have somebody look at it and ask their opinion, and you can change it all. You know what I mean? Like
yeah,
you can change it all before any other human soul looks at it. If you're drawing, you could do 100 sketches in a sketchbook and they could be terrible and nobody has to see them. You know what I mean? It's like,
yeah,
and you can just erase them and like start again, and you just, it's not like, it's a process. It's not like a an A to B task. It's not like, it's not like doing the dishes where like, you're done with the dishes and you're done. It's like,
yeah.
right, just like writing, creating, it's like a constant process. So
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
yeah, it's like you're doing it, you
Yeah,
go back, you fix things, but I think the most valuable thing you can do is just sort of like number one, it's like cutting yourself a little bit of slack, because it's like not putting that on yourself that like you have to be this like amazing talent, like with never having like done it before, or like only having like a little bit of experience. But it's also just kind of being like honest and humble enough to realize that like these are skills you have to develop.
yeah. I mean, it's kind of like, I've been told to compare it kind of like writing is a muscle. And it's
Yeah,
like if you're
yeah,
practicing for a marathon, you have to run, consistently, even if it's bad days, good days,
yeah,
depending on the weather. So if you want to write well, you need to write often. Because if you
yeah.
don't, it's, the muscle's going to atrophy. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's definitely good advice. And also to go with what you said about, you know, if you have an idea, you should just, write it out because you can't start fixing it if it's still stuck in your head. And
Yeah.
I've had a few friends that are like, I have this great idea, but it needs to percolate up here a little bit longer. I'm like, dude, you've been saying that for like 5 years now. Like it's overcooked at this point. You need to
Yeah.
get it out. You need to start doing it because you can't change it until you start it.
Yeah. It's like, you could like you could pick it apart in your head, but it's like it's hard to make progress because it's like you kind of you'll keep kind of going in circles with it, it's
Yeah.
like, so it's much easier to kind of like edit and hammer stuff into shape when when you're like looking at it like on a page.
And yeah, and it's easier to actually see that you're making progress because you could say, "Oh, I'm still kind of just,
Mhm.
rearranging things in my head," but you can't see that you've made any progress. If you get it out and you fix it, physically, at least you can see that, you're getting somewhere. It may just be, I changed the cat ran down the road to the cat sprinted down the road, but you can see the change that you're making. You're
Yeah.
making progress.
Yeah. And also like, just the process of like getting it out, and because when you get it out, like you kind of you need to like put it into like a structure in order for to be able to understand it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So like you kind of need to be like, okay, this happens, then this happens, then this happens, like or whatever structure you're using kind of moves from like the wouldn't it be cool if, to like, okay, well, we're making some decisions and like this is, this is how it's gonna go. And like just the process of doing that, you're gonna like kind of find out what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And you might even find some choices that take you completely down a different path, but that work much better
Yeah.
and were probably the reason why it was like percolating in your head because something wasn't clicking because you weren't able to really look at it from like a different way because you weren't like kind of doing what you needed to do.
You're not really looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're sort of imagining it.
Yeah. That makes sense. All right, man. Well, let's give you a chance to plug yourself. Where can people find you? Where can people keep up to date with stuff that's coming on?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Rich Douek, and that's Douek. And if you remember that, Douek, that is the key to finding me online because there's not a ton of us out there. But it's RDOUEK at Twitter, at Instagram. I'm on that Threads thing. I'm on Blue Sky. Everywhere I can snag that name, I have it. And also you can go to rduec.com and sign up for my newsletter. I send that out it's like semi like bi-weekly or so, like like once or twice a month, basically. And I try to do with my newsletter, I try to do a balance of like I'll talk about what I'm working on, but I also try to talk a lot about stuff we've been talking about of like, um, how I approach writing and tips that I have for um, people who want to create comics or people that want to be creative. Sometimes I'll even talk about like um, business stuff, like like how do you market yourself? How do you should you be worried about AI taking your job? Like stuff like that. Like just
Yeah.
basically kind of like whatever floats in my head that I think is interesting, I like to share with people. And I don't want to be one of those people who's just always like, read my book, read my book, read my book. It's like I'm trying to
Yeah.
give people some in-depth stuff to read that's like wouldn't come across great on Twitter because, just it's like the space limit and stuff. So
Yeah. That makes
yeah.
sense.
Mhm.
Well, you can find this interview and all sorts of other nerd related news, articles, reviews on geek-network.com. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter at GeeksAZ. You can find us on Facebook at Geek Network. I am CD is weird on Instagram. The music for this show is by my friend. It has a band named Polygon Horizon. They're a fantastic band. Go check them out on Bandcamp. The logos for the show are done by my friends Chris Chandler and Mike Belcher. You can find them on Twitter and Instagram. And if you like the show, please leave a review and make sure you tell your friends because word of mouth is our friend. And remember, kids, to embrace the things that feel you're weird and always geek responsibly. Rich, thanks so much for sitting down with me today, man.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I had a great time.